for the pot that you have selected. This is easier said than done, because if you don't make a good, accurate profile, you're not going to have an accurate reproduction of your piece. So I would sketch it out, but I would pay some attention to, say, the width of the opening versus the width of the foot. You know, what's the relationship, the proportion between those? And what's the, if you could imagine my pot filled out there, what's the relationship of the, you know, how wide is it at the widest point compared to the narrowest point, and where does that wide point come in relationship? It's often 1/3, 2/3, not an accident, I don't think, because it's a very nice proportion, is very, very commonly used. So pay some attention to those things when you're making your piece. If you have a piece that has, like I said before, has additions like the griffin head on Andrea's, or a couple of you had sort of dramatic pouring spouts in your pieces, you may want to, well, that's actually a different thing, but you're going to do that at the last anyway. If yours has a rather dramatic foot, does anybody have a, I know several of you did, your photograph here with a pretty dramatic, yeah, that's a good one, that Lauren has. It's possible that you might want to make your piece starting at the top of the foot and make the whole piece, make the foot as a separate piece, and then simply attach them together by scoring and luting them together at the end. You might talk with me individually about that if you have any additional parts, but I do want to see those extra parts if you have those. Okay, so this is going to be a coil pot. I know if you worked with clay before, you've most likely done a coil pot before, but there are some tricks to the trade. So let me talk a little bit about this. First of all, I wouldn't start with a coil. Horizontal coils have a very, very strong tendency to crack because when they dry, they shrink horizontally. You know, if I made the bottom with coils, and as they shrink this way, they seem to want to pull apart. So I would start with just a ball of clay and flatten it out. Make sure it's a ball, and then you get a nice round bottom. If it's not a ball, you're going to get a wonky shaped bottom, and then you're going to have to trim it. So I make a little ball of clay, and then I'm just simply going to press that down and flatten it out. And 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch is a pretty good thickness. I don't have to worry too much about the little cracks there because I'm going to be doing a lot of smearing and smoothing as I go along. But you can see that ball made a pretty nice circle there. Let me talk about the pattern. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me talk about making the pattern, and then I'll get back to this. What I did was draw my profile. I believe your size requirements are at least 12 inches tall, right? Have you read the assignment? This is a file folder, as you can tell, which is more or less 12 inches. So that's a pretty good guide. And I drew just the profile. I didn't draw the whole pot. I just drew one side of the pot for my profile. And when I was sure I liked what I got, actually my drawing lines are on this side. When I was sure I liked what I got, I cut it out and I put this one aside. I keep this because if you lose your pattern, you can use this to make another one. But we're actually going to use the outside to form our pieces as a template. So you can kind of see, you know, if I build up from this side and I mirror that on this side, then I'm going to have a vase that, you know, that this completes my vase. I don't need to have the whole shape because this thing turns around and I can hold this up on every side. So I've got a nice profile, and again, the first thing I'm going to do then is start with the bottom. By the way, I'd make your pattern out of stiff paper if you possibly can. It's really hard to do this when your pattern is flopping back and forth. A good cue is go to the bulletin boards and look for an outdated poster, because those are usually made. In fact, I've got a few of those in here. We've gone through most of them, but that's a pretty good stiff paper. You can make it out of something like a mat board or foam core, but that's it's a little harder to cut. But you're welcome to do that as well. But I would make it out of something stiff. So anyway, I started by making my bottom, And how wide that bottom is something you're going to have to guess at a little bit. But that's why I wanted you to have a photograph. That's a pretty big photograph. So you can sort of, again, check the proportion of the bottom to the widest point and figure how big do you want your piece to be and how wide is the overall pot compared to how tall it is. That's going to help you determine how wide you need to start at the beginning. You can see if Tony made this pot, but she started out with a bottom that's really, really wide, then her pot's going to be really, really wide, and then the relationship of the height to the width is going to be off. So you definitely want to pay some attention to that. This is all definitely, making your pattern all has a lot to do with establishing proportion from the very beginning. The next thing you want to do is start rolling out some coils. This is something I think we always feel like we ought to be good at because little kids, we think of little kids as making coils. One of my favorite Far Side cartoons is entitled "God Makes the Snake," and God's, this crazy white-haired guy with robes is going, "Man, this is easy," which is well, okay, it's funny to me. Anyway, but the truth is that coils are not all that easy to do unless you've practiced doing it. They have a real tendency to go flat, as mine just did. Just starting out, it's definitely kind of two-sided, and I don't have a good way to avoid that, except that if you use really even pressure and roll it beyond 360 degrees, so more than one complete turn, then I tend to have better luck with my coils. If it starts to go flat, I'll turn it on the long side and just kind of pound it down a little bit and get it back to more equal dimensions. But it just takes some practice. The bottom line is it doesn't really matter because we're going to smear these together, so you're not going to be able to see it. So if it's a little lumpy, don't worry about it. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Every single thing you do in clay takes practice. And, this just isn't anything that you spend very much time doing in regular life, unless maybe you're a baker. You might do a lot of this if you're a baker, but I don't think any of you are doing that right now. So I'm just rolling this out. And, the diameter of your finger, little finger, more or less is a pretty good thing to aim for. Any thicker than that, your pot's going to be pretty heavy. Any thinner than that, and it's going to take a long time to finish. Your coil should be a little thicker at the beginning, and as you get up toward the top where there's less weight, they can be thinner, and also you'll be faster because you'll just be better at this. So roll out some coils, something like this. If you want to learn to use the extruder, that's the machine that's at the end of the shelves way down there. It's like the little Play-Doh toy where you stick it and you push the plunger down and the Play-Doh comes out in different shapes. It's exactly that, only bigger. And I'll be glad to show you how to do that. You can extrude all your coils if you want them all to be perfectly even in diameter, but rolling them out is just fine with me. You also, if you're going to roll a bunch out, you want to get some plastic. You want to lay them in the plastic and cover them up. Because it's a coil, it's mostly surface area, right? There's very little interior space. So they're going to dry out really, really quickly. And you don't want, that can cause problems. So if you're going to roll a bunch out, it wouldn't be a bad idea. Then put them in plastic, maybe even mist them down a little bit. Don't soak them in water, but give them a little moisture, and then keep them covered up so that they don't dry out. And in fact, leaving my clay like this uncovered is a really bad idea, because this is drying out as we speak. So after I get some clay and roll it out, I should cover my bag of clay back up. The first coil that you add, you want to actually score and attach with some scoring, just because it's a little hard to get your finger down in it at this point. So I'm scoring my pot. Because we're working with wet clay smears together pretty well. So you don't have to score every piece. And in fact, you don't really need to score the coil as well, although you could. I've had a few students who just want that extra security and have scored and joined every single piece. But it's really not entirely necessary. So I've scored this. I've made my little gravy right here, my clay gravy. And then I'm going to put my coil on it. Whoops. Good or a bad thing about the cork deal. Have I told you about this? This is a champagne cork. Yeah. Is that it bounces when you drop it. So it's supposed to be floating in the water. So I'm going to put my first coil on. I don't usually go several coils at a time. I usually just do it one coil at a time. And then I'm going to hold my pattern up and check and see if I'm doing what I want to do. And I always check it on several points. And I want it to be approximately there. There's lots of places where you can adjust this a little bit, but I want to check it at several points. If anything, I'm going to err a little bit on the side of caution. You can see my pattern is a little further out than my coil is. Can you guys all see that? And the reason for that is when we smear these coils together, there's a tendency to the clay has a tendency to sort of stretch outward. So if you set it inside the point that you want it to be, then you can always adjust it outward. It is virtually impossible to get it to go back inward. It's pretty easy to stretch it outward, but very difficult to go the other direction. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to, let's see if I can do this where you can get it on the film. I'm going to push it down by, I'm actually taking a part of the coil and just pushing it down into the piece of clay that I started out for the bottom. And this is actually a joining process as well as a smoothing process. I'm going to do the same thing on the inside, but that's, you know, it's not as critical. I could probably do a couple of coils before I start to do that. I know people, I mean, I'm just using what little bit of fingernail I have here. I keep my fingernails cut really short, but there's still a hard edge there, transition between your finger and your fingernail, and I'm using that to sort of grab that clay and push it down in. If I use the soft part of my finger, I'm much more likely to push it out wide, and it's not going to join quite as well. So I'm using my finger to do that. You could also use, I don't have one here, you could use the end of your wooden tool and use that as a pushing down tool if that would be easier to do. And then I'm just going to add another coil. This is, like I say, a very slow process at the beginning because, and I could use this, but I'm just going to go ahead and roll out a new coil since I need something a little bit bigger. But you could do it in parts, in sections if you needed to. It goes very, very slowly at the beginning because you need to be very, very sort of cautious. Partly you're just learning how to do it, but partly you're starting at the bottom and it just takes longer at the bottom. The big challenge is if you have a piece, and some of you do, even though I cautioned you not to, have a piece that comes out rather dramatically from the bottom. You can kind of picture this. This is wet clay, it's angling out. I've already said clay doesn't really like to be horizontal, it much prefers being vertical. So the closer to horizontal you get, the more likely gravity is going to want to pull it down. So if that's happening to you, then you may need to actually get the hairdryer, or I've got a heat gun, which is a similar thing as a hairdryer, only it's a lot hotter. So be careful if you use that. And actually dry it out every 2 or 3 coils so that it doesn't, the drier it gets, the less likely it is going to be to drop on you. If you start out, if you've got a pretty extreme angle and you start out and it just isn't working, it's just getting wider and wider, just start again. I'm not a big proponent of starting over. I don't often recommend that, but with a coil pot I think it's really not a bad idea because you can just be spending a lot of time trying to fix something that that just isn't going to fix. So again, I'm checking it with my pattern.